As NASCAR fans, we all know there's no other race like the Daytona 500. By the 2000s, the race had already provided over 40 years of memories and historic moments. Once the 2000s began, we saw many changes to both NASCAR and the Great American Race, from multiple aero packages to the introduction of the Car of Tomorrow, and even which networks broadcasted the races. We saw dominant performances, surprise winners, and spectacular finishes that'll be replayed for the rest of our lives. But which ones were the best of the 2000s? Let's find out as I rank every Daytona 500 in the 2000s from worst to best. Number 10, the 2003 Daytona 500. Other than lead changes on the initial start and another on the final restart, the 2003 edition of the race had 0 green flag passes for the lead. For a while though, it was shaping up to be a pretty standard Daytona 500 until lap 58, when Ryan Newman flipped through the infield grass after the crossover gate ripped the rear end housing off his car. While under caution, the rain came and the race was red flagged for an hour. Once we got going again, everyone knew more rain was on the way and they were racing to the next delay. The last 12 laps included 3 more incidents that brought some pit strategy into play, but Michael Waltrip was able to use his lap teammate, Dale Earnhardt Jr., to get by Jimmy Johnson on the final restart. Less than a lap later, the caution would fly, the rains would arrive again, and the end of the shortest Daytona 500 would come shortly after. With rain coming twice in one race, both while already under caution, maybe there is something to DW's vortex theory. The shortening of the race and the string of cautions at the end really hurt what could have been a decent race. It was nice to see Michael Waltrip be able to actually celebrate a Daytona 500 victory though. Number 9, the 2000 Daytona 500. The first Daytona 500 of the decade was also the last for longtime broadcaster CBS. Because of the lack of passing, this race would be a big factor in a refined aero package being introduced later that year at Talladega. However, I didn't think it was as bad as its reputation would make you believe. While there were only 9 lead changes, behind the leaders there was close side-by-side racing both early and late in the race. This was also the first Daytona 500 including both Dale Jr. and Sr., and at points both seemed like contenders. On a late caution, underdog Johnny Benson took 2 tires on his final pit stop to take the lead, which he held until just 4 laps to go when Dale Jarrett and the rest of the leaders moved past him. Of course, the race would end under caution, so we didn't get a chance to see if anyone could compete with Jarrett and his dominant Robert Yates Ford. The top 5 positions were swept by Ford, while top GM drivers Jeff Gordon, Tony Stewart, and Dale Earnhardt all had issues. I also thought the Frito-sponsored animations that were shown during the race that taught us about pit stops and drafting were top-notch. Number 8, the 2009 Daytona 500. The last Daytona 500 of the decade earns its ranking because of Mother Nature. Called just after the 3/4 mark, it was shaping up to be a great race to the finish, as seen by the intensity of the last few short runs before the rains came. Kyle Busch dominated, but a battle between lapped cars Brian Vickers and Dale Earnhardt Jr. at the front of the pack took out a number of contenders, including Busch. Once again, the Car of Tomorrow produced solid racing on the superspeedways. The last 50 laps of so many of these 2000s Daytona 500s were chaotic, and it's very likely we were deprived of that in the 2009 edition of the race. Matt Kenseth passed Elliott Sadler, and only a half lap later the caution flew for an Eric Almirola spin. During the caution, the rains came, which would eventually end the race early, and Matt Kenseth became a Daytona 500 champion. This would also be team owner Jack Roush's first Daytona 500 victory. Number 7, the 2004 Daytona 500. The 46th running of the Great American Race was also the first under the Nextel Cup Series banner. The racing was good the first half of the race, with cautions spaced out enough to not let the field get too spread out. On lap 72, defending race champion Michael Waltrip rolled down the backstretch in the biggest accident and last caution of the day. The race ended on a 120-lap green flag run, with Tony Stewart leading a majority of the laps. As the race progressed, the lead pack began thinning out more and more, and eventually made it very difficult to make any passes. Unfortunately, television coverage focused solely on the leaders during the second half of the race, so it was difficult to know whether there were any good battles through the rest of the field. With 20 laps to go, Dale Earnhardt Jr. was able to get around Stewart and hold on for the win. 6 years to the day, his father won his only Daytona 500. Number 6, the 2002 Daytona 500. The first Daytona 500 on NBC included one of the more bizarre endings in the race's history. Race favorite Tony Stewart only made 2 laps before an engine failure ended his day. Fellow favorite Dale Earnhardt Jr. had an eventful day, suffering early damage from a blown right front tire. While he recovered to run top 10 for a while, he then blew a right rear tire and took a ride through the infield grass. While exiting his pits, he almost took out a NASCAR official, and then after going behind the wall for repairs, came back out and got involved in the big one later in the race. That big one was triggered around the 3/4 distance mark, when Kevin Harvick tried to put a block on Jeff Gordon, basically taking himself out and collecting 17 cars in the process. Now, to review that bizarre finish. Jeff Gordon led Sterling Marlin on a restart with 5 laps to go when a pileup in the tri-oval caused another quick caution. While that was occurring, Jeff tried to block Sterling's inside move and spun through the infield grass. Since they raced back to the line in 2002, Sterling beat Ward Burton back to the caution by a foot or 2. Under the red flag, Sterling, concerned about a tire rub, hopped out of his car and started pulling out his damaged fender. With rules stating you can't work on your car under a red flag, Sterling was penalized. That handed the lead to Ward Burton, who led the final 3 laps to win Dodge's first Daytona 500 since 1974. Overall, a solid 500 with some memorable moments. Number 5, the 2005 Daytona 500. This was supposed to be both Mark Martin and Rusty Wallace's final Daytona 500. It would be Rusty's last, but Mark ran, let me check my notes, 8 more 500s. So maybe that 401k plan wasn't doing as well as he expected. Tony Stewart led more than half the race, leading the most laps for the second consecutive year, but came up short again. Unfortunately, the race was interrupted by 7 cautions for debris or oil, and 11 overall. There were multiple restarts late in the race, with the best of the best in contention for the win. Gordon, Johnson, Busch, Earnhardt, and Stewart would swap positions at the front of the field, with Jeff Gordon holding off Kurt Busch on a green-white checkered finish to take his 3rd Daytona 500. This would be the first 500 to finish over the scheduled distance at 203 laps due to the green-white checkered rule introduced the previous year. Number 4, the 2007 Daytona 500. The last Daytona 500 with the Gen 4 car, and first for Toyota, resulted in one of the wildest finishes in the history of the race. The first 400 miles were pretty tame, with Tony Stewart and Kurt Busch dominating and a lot of single-file racing. Shortly after Stewart went from the back of the pack to the lead under a long green flag run, he got loose, Busch couldn't stay off him, and the 2 best cars were out of the race. After that, the battle for the win was wide open, and the racing between the multiple cautions the last 30 laps was intense. Sentimental favorite Mark Martin led 26 consecutive laps until the final one, when Kevin Harvick came out of nowhere to pull beside him and beat him to the line as the rest of the field crashed out of turn 4, and Clint Bowyer finished the race upside down and on fire. The finish of this race gets replayed so much, as it should. It's just so wild and chaotic, and even the camera shot of the side-by-side finish was outstanding. Number 3, the 2006 Daytona 500. The 2006 edition of the Great American Race is one that doesn't get talked about much, but I thought it was entertaining throughout. Nobody dominated, with 8 drivers leading between 18 and 32 laps. The race had an eerie feeling to it, starting under overcast skies, but the fog and mist got worse as the day progressed. At times, it was even difficult to see the cars very well on the broadcast, especially down the backstretch. Tony Stewart had quite the day, early on getting into both Jeff Gordon and the wall, and then getting upset at and intentionally spinning Matt Kenseth into turn 3, which NASCAR sent him to the back for. After that, he got sent to the back again for running over pit equipment and got into another on-track scuffle with Kyle Busch, but somehow came back to finish 5th. In the end, Jimmy Johnson claimed victory with interim crew chief Darian Grubb after Chad Knaus was suspended for issues found during qualifying. This was also the highest ever rated Daytona 500 to my knowledge. Number 2, the 2001 Daytona 500. Okay, so this one's really tough to rank, but I'm doing it based just on the racing from that day, which was fantastic for the first 499 miles. The new aero package, which was introduced the previous fall at Talladega, produced 49 lead changes, the most since the 1983 Daytona 500. This was also the first race on the Fox network and the first race back for manufacturer Dodge, which swept the front row. Despite the close pack racing, there were just 2 minor incidents until the big one occurred on lap 175, taking out a number of contenders, including Tony Stewart, who took an ugly tumble down the backstretch. After the red flag and cleanup, even with the diminished pack, the racing was still great until turn 4 on the last lap, where we lost the great Dale Earnhardt. The accident overshadowed Michael Waltrip's breakthrough win and brother Darrell's emotional call to the checkered flag. It was one of the darkest days in the sport's history, and like I said earlier, earns this ranking solely for the on-track racing product that day. Number 1, the 2008 Daytona 500. The first Daytona 500 of the Car of Tomorrow era takes the top spot of the decade for me. The race only had 1 caution through the first 150 laps, and while the race was a bit spread out at times, instead of running single file, it seemed like the drivers were able to run different grooves and make moves on one another despite not being tightly packed together. To me, that made this race more intriguing than most for the first 350 or so miles. The race eventually followed the trend of most others in the mid to late 2000s, where the last 50 laps would have quite a few cautions, but the style of racing changed to include lots of pack and side-by-side racing. Kyle Busch led the most laps, but on the last lap, couldn't push teammate Tony Stewart to the win. Brother Kurt Busch, who started last, was able to push Penske teammate Ryan Newman past Stewart down the backstretch, and Newman beat everyone back to the line to claim victory in the 50th Daytona 500. It was the first 500 and first restrictor plate win for a Roger Penske-owned car. So there you have it. Those are my rankings of all the Daytona 500s in the 2000s. Thank you so much for watching, and if you have your own rankings, please post them in the comments. Please remember, everyone has their own criteria for what makes a good race, and there are no right or wrong answers here. And don't forget to smash those like and subscribe buttons.